Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good day, and welcome to another Veeam live stream on Industry Insights. Today, I'm joined by special guest Paul Stringfellow. My usual co-host Jason Buffington has time off for good behavior for a couple of weeks here. Paul, love to welcome you into the stream. You're no stranger to Veeam by any stretch. And I thought it might actually be best for you to do your own introduction. I could butcher it, just like I can butcher just about anything, but would love to just have people that may not be familiar with you or Gardner systems or any of the other programs that you're involved in, such as NetApp, A-Team, Veeam, Vanguard, etc. Learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, hi Dave. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'll apologise in advance for we've got a bit of shaky broadband, so a couple of technical problems down at this end. But yeah, my name's Paul Stringfellow. I'm technical director of a data management consultancy business in the UK called Gardner Systems. As you mentioned, Dave, yeah, I'm nearly 30 years in the IT industry now. So obviously started when I was a young child. And a lot of my work at that time has been around consultancy. And we very much work in a customer-led, customer-focused world, I guess, working in the IT channel. So really the last kind of 4 years of my job role has been very much focused around this idea of data management, data consultancy, hence the kind of the tagline that Gardner Systems now operates with as the data company. So and my background before joining Gardner Systems, I think you've got on the slide there, I've been with Gardner's now over 25 years. I'd spent a little bit of time working in the pharmaceutical industry before that. Got a university degree ahead of that as well. So, but you know, a lot of my experience has been with Gardner's, and the attraction really of being with one company for so long, because I think that's one question that I often get asked, is that we're very lucky in that we have we get to work across a very wide breadth of different types of companies, different type of organizations, and we get very different challenges on a very regular basis. So I think the challenges that we come across and the opportunities and the spaces I get to work in are very, very varied. It almost feels like I've got a new job role about every 18 months at the moment.
And that's excellent, Paul. And that's really one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you as a co-host to discuss sort of modern data management practices for these kind of curious times. It's become a cliche, an unprecedented year, unprecedented times, but truly 2020 has been just that and more. So let's jump right into it, because we do want to focus on data protection and data management strategies for these kind of curious times that we find ourselves in. I think every single year, you mentioned, like 30 years now, Paul, I'm about the same. Every year is always a challenge in some regards, right? There's something that's shifting externally, internally, something that you have to react to. And then along comes every now and then, something like a 2019, maybe the closest thing I can recall is 2008, meaning the global macroeconomic challenge. It really forced a lot of people in industry, wherever you were in the world, en masse, to revisit things, to make some new decisions. Let's first tee up, when we talk about data strategies, you had a phrase I wrote down, and I don't want to steal it, although I'm so tempted to. I want to let you talk through it first, but it's not just the gear. There's data, there's infrastructure, obviously there's software, but all of these things have their place. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the idea of having, and I wish I knew what the phrase was that you wanted to steal. I have so many of them, but I think for me, one of the key challenges that I see in the kind of the work that we do today is that lots and lots of organizations talk to us about the idea that data is absolutely crucial to all elements of their business. They see data as the new gold. They want to see the opportunity, or data as the new oil. They want to see the opportunity that they can create around data. And then when you talk to companies about whether they have something specific in terms of a data strategy, very much, 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. What do you mean? We build our IT strategies based on infrastructure, on hardware, on location. And that's a real problem. And I think, as you was talking, Dave, before about this kind of unprecedented challenges, unprecedented situations we've seen this year, I think one of the things that we learned and saw very early on was that those companies who'd had a more data-focused approach, more data-focused, more outcome-focused approach to how they started to develop their IT strategies, found some of the changes that they needed to make in 2020, to continue to be productive and continue to respond to some of the challenges that COVID had placed on us. Those who'd already had a very data-focused strategy found that kind of shift an awful lot easier. When they weren't restrained by infrastructure, they weren't restrained necessarily by location. Their focus had been very much on the value of their data and the outcomes that their data allows them to give them. And for me, it's a shift in the way that we look at our IT infrastructure. It's a shift in the way that we need to think about how we deliver technical services inside of any organization. So I'm very this kind of approach that is data focused. So we look at the data first, and then we design the infrastructure and the locations to sit below that, as opposed to, I think, what's traditionally happened, that idea of that
Yeah, Paul, maybe having some of his video and audio freeze up. I like the point there that it's all data driven. And I really like the notion. Paul actually was chatting with me and mentioned, data versus infrastructure. And it's not data against infrastructure. It's just the idea of decoupling the two. Modern data strategy focuses on many things. Security right in the middle there is certainly no surprise. That portability and scale I find fascinating in particular. Data portability, cloud mobility, but being able to do that at full-on scale. We did have a question that comes in, and I do want to just pause to reiterate, if you do have questions, please do type those in on the comment section there. We've got a team that's relaying that back to us. Question came from, I believe it's Meg, that says, Veeam has shown 22% year-on-year growth the last quarter. How do you see it fare against other vendors? Short answer is very, very well. IDC released its most recent numbers not too long ago, as did Gardner. In the backup storage software space, Veeam jumped from number 4 to number 3 in market. So it's been growing. IDC tracks replications software revenue as well as backup software revenue. And of the top 5 named vendors, Veeam, again, for the 4th time in the calendar half year, grew the most sequentially, grew the most year over year. In fact, most of the vendors are going negative year over year. So thankfully, even though it's been, as we said earlier, a challenging 2020, we're actually up year over year compared to this time prior year. But I do want to come back, Paul, it was that kind of data versus infrastructure notion, and the idea also that this isn't about any one thing when you construct a full data management strategy. And I liked how you were kind of almost working backwards. You begin with the end in mind, and then you scale back rather than just thinking, here's my implementation. Now let's build something around these piece parts that I have. I think that made a lot of sense. To me, it reminded me of kind of like a business impact assessment for disaster recovery. What's truly most important, and then you work from there.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues that you get when you design from infrastructure up is that often, and again, I think this is just it's a problem that we have had as IT people, I guess, is this kind of traditional idea that we choose our infrastructure based on the technology that we like. We put it in a data center that we like, and then we go back to our organization and present that as a fait accompli almost, that we say, there you go, there's your platform. Now put stuff on it, and hopefully you'll be able to do things that are useful. And we didn't start the other way around, which was to ask the question about what is it that we need what is it our organization is trying to do? What are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And let's then try and design our infrastructure, our platforms around that. And again, just listening to kind of your response you was given to the question there, Dave, I think that I think one of the things that Veeam has been doing really well, and I think one of the reasons that Veeam is seeing the growth and success that they're seeing, is the more I listen to Veeam's leadership, the more I listen to, some of those people like Danny Allen when they present at things like Veeam On, the more I hear of those guys, you can see very much that Veeam have grabbed this idea that Veeam are no longer a backup company. The idea that they need to focus on data and the outcomes that their customers want from data is allowing them to very much change the direction and the way that they kind of implement products and the way they think about the products and services they provide. So, so I think Veeam themselves are a good example of a company that has made this kind of strategic data switch from thinking about the data and the outcomes and removing that from thinking about software, infrastructure, and location.
And where you sit, Paul, is an interesting space, right? Because you're certainly a technologist, a practitioner, and that's largely what people would know you for, Gardner Systems for. But you're also a bit of sort of like an archaeologist trying to uncover the truth, trying to uncover what the businesses in the past been trying to do and what they want to do going forward. So how do you balance that kind of engagement? Maybe someone comes to you and says, I have a customer relationship management problem. I need a new CRM system. How do you begin to decompose, just thinking about data strategies and data management? How do you work backwards to try to get that mesh of business requirement, existing technology, maybe technology or technologies that they think that they're interested in going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's an interesting challenge as well, because I think often a business will come to you with a conversation around, I want a new CRM system. And they will base that on that they've done some due diligence. They have thought about the things that they're looking to achieve. I don't think they've spun the wheel of fortune and CRM has been the thing that's come out and they've gone to look for somebody to speak to. But from my point of view, as somebody who is looking at this from a data focus, again, I think we take very much the same steps. It's just to step back a moment and ask them why they think a CRM system. So, what is it that they are looking to achieve? What are the outcomes that they're trying to drive as a business? How are they trying to present applications and data? Because I think if the last 4 months or so have taught us anything, I guess it's the idea that as organizations, we need access to data and we need access to our applications. They are the outcomes that we need. They're the tools that we need to drive our business. And I think even that, whether it's CRM or anything else, that's about asking that question around what are we trying to achieve? Where do we need to deliver those applications and data? Who in the organization needs outcomes? What kind of outcomes they need? And I'm not saying that we would ever say you don't need a CRM system. If that's what they want, that's what they want. But I think it's almost to take a look at if something that the public cloud has taught us, I think, has been that organizations increasingly realize they no longer need to worry about the underlying plumbing quite as much as they used to. We're very used now to go into the Azure marketplace, to the AWS marketplace, finding a service that sounds like the thing that we want and clicking a button that says, can I have one of those services, please? Right. And that service then created and delivered on our behalf. We don't worry about, is that running on an Intel server with Windows and some storage underneath it, and how are we backing it up? None of those things really matter. And I actually think that's quite a big, that's allowing us to start to make this shift that says that when we want to talk to somebody about be data focused, be application focused, be focused around outcomes, I actually think that conversation today is easier than it would have been 4 or 5 years ago, and partly driven by a lot of the migration we've taken to cloud. If we pick on Office 365 maybe as a good example, nobody really thinks about how Office 365 works under the covers. What we think about is, can I get my email? Can I use Teams to collaborate? Can I store information in SharePoint where appropriate? And I just need those things, and I need those things to lots and lots of different locations on lots and lots of different devices. I don't need to worry about, is that running on a certain set of hardware, certain set of software, certain set of storage? And I think that's an important shift for all of these conversations, including something you touched on before, the idea of focusing on security and protection of our data as well.
Great point. Yeah, and we just had another question come in, Paul, which I believe is also from Meg. How important is the alliance agreements or alliance program for Veeam? And it's actually perfect timing to have that question, because just as you're describing how all these pieces have to come together, nothing is in isolation. And probably it's true in every world, but in the data center, very few things exist off as an island, right? There's a lot of coordination. And from a Veeam perspective, Our entire go-to-market is alliance-based, meaning we don't have any kind of Veeam logoed hardware. We work with a variety of infrastructure partners, a variety of application partners and hypervisor partners. So our goal is to be 100% alliance focused, to embrace an ecosystem, both northbound from a management plane perspective and application and data, and then southbound into horizontal and southbound storage integrations. Now, another one, and then we'll switch gears here slightly though, is how does one convince a customer to buy Veeam or probably any Office 365 or Microsoft 365 protection? And I'll give an answer, and then Paul, please, you chime in as well as it relates to, probably could genericize this to how do you talk to anyone about protecting any software as a service-based application. I think it's a bit of education, meaning you have to look at what is the SaaS provider, Office 365 in this case, doing for you by default, and is that consistent or not with what you would have experienced if you had the application on-prem, or if the application never existed. Just ask yourself, can I meet my requirements? Is it okay if something is deleted that I can't get it back, say 90 days later, whatever the time frame may be? But curious how you would have that conversation, Paul, if someone says, do I need to protect SaaS?
Yeah, and I think, Dave, I would take exactly the same approach that you've taken to it. I think, the conversation I will have with a customer, it's not about whether you use Veeam backup for Office 365 or you use anything else. I think the question is, again, it goes back very much to the point we were talking about before. You start with the why. You start with what is the outcome that I'm trying to deliver. So, the conversation I'll have around Office 365 specifically is understand what the native data protection capabilities of Office 365 are, understand whether they are going to help you to meet your business goals. Do they help you to meet your recovery point objectives, your recovery time objectives, your business continuity requirements? If they are good enough to allow you to do all of those things, then that's great. Stick with the native tools inside of Office 365. If they're not, then we need to look at the market. We need to understand, do kind of a gap analysis. Where are the gaps in those native tools? And then what do I need to find to go and fill those gaps to ensure that I can deliver the things that I need to do? So I think probably similar to yourself, Dave, that would be the approach that I'd be taking. Understand the requirement, find out where the gaps lie in the native tools. And if I then need third-party tools to help to supplement that capability, then I'll go out and find them.
Yeah, brilliant. And as we switch gears here, let's put a finer point on what modern data protection might look like, and look at data protection and a bit data security, because they are so intertwined. For those that may not have seen some of the previous live streams, particularly Jason Buffington and I have been unpacking this global survey that Veeam launched, and it was done by a third party, so no one knew that it was Veeam asking the questions, but we had over 1,500 global organizations, mostly enterprises. And we asked them a series of questions. And here's but one simple one. Which would you consider of this whole list of things to be defining aspects of, quote, modern or, quote, innovative data management or data protection solutions for your organization? You could choose all. And then in the kind of lighter colored bar, you singly chose what was the most important. What I think is kind of interesting here, Paul, I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, so I'll just unpack it verbally, that many things, as you might expect, are important, meaning if you're allowed to choose all, many people do choose a large number of capabilities. But if you had to only choose one, you've got some clustering around the ability to do disaster recovery in the cloud, like DRaaS. You've got the ability to automate recovery workflow and orchestration. You've got things like being able to integrate with other systems, such as systems management solutions via API. So there's, again, this heavy automation theme. And what I want to do, just to put you on the spot a little bit, Paul, is say, does any of this surprise you, that if people were asked in kind of a blind survey what you think modern protection would look like, an emphasis on cloud in particular, emphasis on automation in particular, is that consistent with what you would expect, or does that come as a surprise at all?
It certainly doesn't come as a surprise, because that kind of conversation is the conversation I have consistently. It's the idea of, yeah, we started this conversation, didn't we, by talking about what do we mean by a modern data platform? What do we mean by data strategy? And core elements for me of a modern data platform include things like data portability. So can I move my data to the location I need it to be in at the time that I need it to be there? Automation, as poor human beings, we can't keep up with the amount of data that we generate, the constantly changing requirements that our organizations have on us, the amount of the amount of requirements and the amount of things that we require from our data inside of any organization. So automation is hugely key to that. So those kind of things like portability, or that ability to move that data around, that ability to have intelligence in our system so that it can make automated decisions on our behalf, I think is absolutely crucial. So I think in reality, as much of an eye test as that was, I don't think there's anything in there that should be a surprise. And I think if you're tasked in your organization with driving the way that your company is going to use data and designing those platforms that are going to help your business to deliver on its requirements, then these are absolutely the things that you need to be looking at. And you shouldn't be, because I think one of the things are on there is that ability to move between clouds. If we forget the idea of moving between public clouds and just take that as the idea of moving between locations, that to me speaks of the idea of not being siloed, not treating public cloud as another silo in our data center. We need to break those kind of walls down so that we can operate in this kind of, whether we mean public cloud or not, it's the ability to operate in this cloud-like fashion where we can make changes quickly, where we can scale up, where we can have our data in locations where we need it to be, where we can present it to new technologies so that we can get additional value from our data. So I think all of those things, modern data protection, modern strategy, what do they need to look like? I think they need to include all of those things that are on that chart. If we needed to add more bars to that chart.
Yeah, brilliant. And I probably didn't give enough emphasis to security, which came out very high as well when you could select all, or even if you could only select one. And I think that this shows the tight coupling between proper data management and security. I always say I'm not a security specialist, but by virtue of touching the data, I have a role to play in security, whether that's upfront and understanding if there's some anomalous activity, such we've got trends that resources are being consumed disproportionately to the past, to after the fact being able to remediate against a malicious attack. So let's kind of go into the next topic, which we're basically, whatever you want to call it, 65, 70, maybe almost % of the way through this calendar year. Let's just put our crystal ball out for a moment and say, what do we think if there hopefully soon is a post-pandemic world, what this looks like? Meaning, Paul, when we were chatting a little bit about the future, it's hard to imagine that we reset completely to 2019 from a data center perspective. Work from home is but one great example. The ability to have meetings at any time versus getting on a train or a plane, the ability to embrace more cloud projects. But before I give you some of my observations, love to hear what you're thinking, what you're already sensing, sort of maybe second half of this year. But if there is something like a new normal after this, where does the pendulum kind of fall in the middle, do you think?
Yeah, and again, I think it's a good question. It's a good consideration, and certainly the conversation I've been having. I think as we talk about kind of this post-COVID world, if there is going to be a post-COVID world, but I think as we talk about that, it's a lot of people talked about the idea of maybe returning to normal. Going back to the office, going back to their kind of the way their lives were, and I think while for many people we hope that the returning to normal will indeed be returning to normal, I think it would be a missed opportunity. I think if we didn't look at the things that we've learned over, the last 4 months or so, if we didn't look at the things that we've learned from that and looked at how we might be able to do things differently, do things more effectively, operate our businesses differently, operate our day-to-day lives differently, I think it would be a hugely missed opportunity. I think that would be a real pity, and I think while without doubt, COVID has come with huge downsides. A lot of tragedy. A lot of people have lost their lives because of a virus, because of this pandemic. As technologists, I think trying to step aside from that for a moment, I think as technologists, it's presented a huge opportunity for us to have a big rethink in the way that we think about our applications. And that conversation we started this with, where we talked about the way that we look at data differently. We build data strategies differently by looking at the data and working down. I think this situation has allowed us to, for a lot of organizations, to start to embrace that a lot more. They've taken a look at, I need to think differently. I need to learn from things that worked well and things that didn't work well as we try to build our initial COVID response. And we need to think how we're going to change things. But I think there are things as well that we need to consider that maybe we haven't been now. You touched before, Dave, on perhaps we skipped over security a little bit. And certainly one big area that I've seen kind of over the last couple of months as people have started to think forward is that idea of security, and thinking differently about the way they secure their data, because most of our data today won't live in the way that we have had it before, living in the secure walls of our data center. Increasingly, not only is our data in repositories like the public cloud, our data is also being delivered not to 1,000 users inside of a big head office somewhere, but actually being delivered to 1,000 offices around a location. We need to think about how we ensure our security of our data, security of our information travels with that as well. And I think we also are seeing people starting to look retrospectively at the things that they had to do quickly out of necessity, and are looking at those things now and thinking, how do I retrospectively go and correct some of those things? So I think that as we look forward, I think absolutely we should be grasping the opportunity to do things differently and to learn from things that have worked well and things that maybe haven't. How we look to prepare ourselves for whatever the next event will be. Hopefully it won't be an event like this one, but there will be something. You talked about financial crash 2008. What's going to be the thing in 2030 that maybe we need to respond to? And how do we make sure we've designed our technology to deal with that? And because I think, even if we were to have a kind of a second wave that gets talked about a lot, where we find ourselves in these kind of lockdown situations again, I think if we're delivering technology to our businesses and we want to start to use some of the excuses that maybe we found first time round, that we didn't have the right kind of platforms in place, I don't think that's going to wash quite as well second time round. We need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And really quickly, there was a question that came in the future, is subscription licensing the way forward as compared to, say, socket-based licensing models? And, one of the things I think that we will see is a change in procurement patterns, meaning I think subscription, that we're already headed towards that way as an industry. I think for many, particularly now hopefully coming out of this current economic issue that many businesses find themselves in, the idea of swapping around CapEx and OpEx, the idea of not having to have all expenses paid up front is going to be appealing. I think also the notion of software defined and being able to leverage infrastructure that you already have, the being able to hang on to gear and repurpose that longer is going to continue. But as we begin to wrap up, Paul, let's look ahead, because I know Gardner Systems has something coming up, I believe this Friday. We've got a slide on that. Maybe you could take us through that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We kind of finished off the question there about what have we learned? What does kind of post-COVID look like? What does the future look like? And it's been a really interesting learning curve, not just for us, but obviously for a lot of our customers. So we wanted to run an event to highlight that. So we've entitled the event about focusing on the adaptation that many of us have had to make, and how people have learned from that, and kind of how they're going to take some of those lessons and use them going forward. So we're running an online event. Obviously, I'm based in the UK, so that's not ideal for people to turn up to. But of course, one of the joys of online events is that doesn't matter. So we're running an online event this Friday, 9:30 UK time. I think the link is on the bottom of the slide there. Anybody listening to this who wants to kind of come and listen to, so we've got people from small businesses to kind of local city region authorities presenting on some of the things that they've learned and some of their takeaways from the last 4 months or so. So if people want to kind of come and listen to some of those experiences and maybe take some of those some of those experiences and use them in their own planning for the future, then of course they're more than welcome to join us. They say can visit the site that was there on the slide, gardnersystems.co.uk/digital events, register, and we'll send out the link to the meeting later in the week.
Yeah, brilliant. And we're going to bring up some contact information for you as well. I think I failed to mention that you have a very highly successful podcast. I don't say that just because I was on it once. It was highly successful, and then I think I created it. But you've come up with some great new branding here for the TechStringy podcast. Just tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, that's true, Dave. The show has recovered. Thank you since you were on. No, I'd love to have you on again. I think we've got a couple of topics I'd kind of love to cover in the next series when we start to record in the autumn again. But yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier on, maybe people on watching this stream will recognize me from the internet as TechStringy, but on there I write articles. I kind of exploring enterprise technology. I'm an enterprise technologist. That's what I do. But I've got an enthusiasm for that as well, and I kind of like to try and share that enthusiasm in the best way possible. So for me, I kind of write. So you can find that on my blog site at techstringy.com. The podcast, Dave, yeah, thanks for mentioning tech interviews. Again, you can see the link there. I don't need to read them all out. And I'm starting to experiment a little bit around YouTube videos. Obviously, I'm going to get the internet connection sorted out, so we don't have some of the challenges we've seen today. But to do things like demonstration videos, more video versions of the podcast as well, because I think like this session, I think often people do like to see the people that they're listening to and who are sharing their words of wisdom or not, in my case, maybe. So we can kind of do more of that kind of stuff. And of course, I'm at TechStringy on Twitter. So if people want to kind of catch up with me after this, then that's a good place to find me. And find me on LinkedIn as well if they require a more professional conversation.
Well, brilliant. And as we look ahead, speaking of Friday, in addition to what Gardner Systems has, we will also have a live stream at Veeam. It'll be 11 U.S. Eastern time, which I believe is 5 p.m. CET time. Our own Gil Lowe will be having a conversation with Veeam's leadership team in Canada. I don't want to steal their thunder, but they have actually been doing fantastic, meaning growing substantially year over year. So they're going to have a little bit more of a conversation on that really quickly. Want to give a shout out to this. Speaking of maybe I didn't give security enough respect and attention. We have put together at Veeam a number of ransomware related assets, but now we have something we call a Ransomware Prevention Kit. And within that, we've got a great white paper written by our own Rick Vanover. He's actually done a shortened live stream taking people through that, as well as a deep dive webinar that accompanies that and a trial of Veeam software as well. So I do want to give a highlight to that. I see there's a couple other questions coming in. We've gotten just a little bit long, so I will jump in to the comment section right after this and answer a few things. But I do want to take us full circle. Paul, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy afternoon in the England area to chat with us. Really appreciate that. We'll let you get on to your first pint of the day. I'll be catching up to you in about 8 hours later. Thanks for everyone for joining. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you again on the LinkedIn live stream. Bye, y'all.